After Joshua died, the Israelites began to worship other gods. Because of this, God caused them to lose their battles and become slaves of other nations. Each time this happened, God would raise up one man or woman called a judge to help the Israelites escape. But after each escape, Israel would go back to their old ways, not living how God had told them to live. Then they would lose another battle and fall back into slavery. This cycle happened over and over again. At one point, the Israelites were enslaved in a country called Midian. They cried out to God for rescue, and God sent an angel to a man named Gideon to help them. God told Gideon the only way to beat the Midianites was to send only a small number of soldiers, just 300. So, in the middle of the night, the 300 soldiers came to the edge of the Midianite camp, blew their trumpets all at once, and smashed jars with torches in them. The incredible sight and sound this made confused and terrified the Midianites so much they began to kill one another. Gideon and the Israelites chased the remaining Midianites and killed them all. After this battle, Israel enjoyed 40 years of peace. But when Gideon died, the Israelites went back to their old ways, worshiping other gods. So they were captured by the Philistines. God sent another judge named Samson. Samson had long hair and was incredibly strong. At one point, he actually killed a wild lion with his bare hands, tearing it to pieces. The Philistine leaders were afraid of Samson because of his incredible strength, so they came up with a plan. They knew Samson had fallen in love with a woman named Delilah, so they paid her to find out the secret behind his superhuman strength. After much convincing, Samson revealed that his long hair made him strong. Soon after, while Samson was sleeping, Delilah led the leaders into his room and they cut off his hair. With his strength gone, the Philistines gouged his eyes out and threw him in prison. While there, his hair grew back and his strength began to return. One day, while the Philistines were partying, they took Samson out of prison, forcing him to perform in front of them in their palace. While standing between two pillars, Samson prayed that God would give him strength. Then he placed his hands on the pillars and shook them until the roof of the palace completely caved in, killing all the Philistines as well as himself. After Samson's death, the Israelites' pattern of disobedience continued, and God would need to look outside of Israel for someone who would follow God's ways.
Great stories. Great, amazing stories of people that just don't quite get it. Well, we start with another day in the land of milk and honey. It's been a number of years since Grandma and Grandpa were wandering in the desert. And long gone is the time when the people were disobedient to Moses, when they didn't believe that the land they were in was their land, when their ancestors wandered around the desert until all but 2 of them out of the millions died. And now the residents are privileged to be in this land where there's plenty of land, where there's plenty of food, and where they have this reputation for having a God who is determined to protect them, and so the people around them are going to leave them alone. But there are problems in this paradise. When they crossed the Jordan River and came into the new land, God knew there was going to be death. Either they were all going to be wiped out by the current inhabitants, or they were going to wipe out the current inhabitants. And God chose to stand with his people, and they wiped out the current residents and took over the land. And so they fought, and they fought pretty well for the most part. They fought with confidence, they took his direction. When they didn't, they got slapped back down, and they conquered the land, and they won, and they obeyed God, except they didn't quite obey him. See, they were told to wipe out everybody. So there was nobody left. And they kind of did. But they did leave some people there. And that came to haunt them. We see the angel of the Lord appear saying, I brought you up out of Egypt, and I brought you into a land that I had promised your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And your part is that you don't make any agreements with people in this land and you destroy their altars. But you have not obeyed my command. See what you have done? Now I'm telling you, I will not drive them out before you. They will become your enemies, and their gods will snare you. And so the people begin to run into some problems. They give their time and their attention and their allegiance to these gods who are part of a different whole understanding. And we read, the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgetting the Lord their God and worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs, the other gods who were vicious. Other reasons to obey other gods, because you believe those gods bring the sunshine or bring the winter or bless you in some way. So it's not like they just randomly chose that, but they felt like that was more important than trusting in Yahweh. Well, the Israelites' attention to those gods and their trust in them instead of the God caused God grief. And we read time and time again, therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of some terrible king who enslaved them. And it happened 6 times. Not once or twice or 2 or 3 or 4 times. 6 times. And each time the same thing happened. And there was this cycle of failure, moral failure, and then an army conquering them, and then a desperate call for help, and then God sending somebody to help them, and then victory and peace, and then moral failure and starting the whole cycle over again. 6 times? Why does God jump in and do that? Time and time and time again. There's some things we can learn about who our God is by how he's acting towards this rebellious, stiff-necked group of people. First, our God doesn't want any other gods before him. He told them at Sinai, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness or anything. For I am the Lord your God, and I am a jealous God. God wants it known that he is the power, he is the source, he is in control, and all these others are nothing compared to him. And so he saves his people, giving them evidence that, yeah, he really can do that. Because he is a jealous God, and he wants all of us. Secondly, we see that he is a compassionate God. He is a God who has a heart. He isn't a God who just set up this very complicated world, wound it all up like a watch, and then walked away. He is a compassionate, heartfelt God. You know how we know what goes on in Africa. We know that every morning lions get up and they search out the gazelles, and the lions go out and they attack the gazelles, right? And we know that happens. But it kind of makes us cringe when we see those on TV, those pictures of lions attacking those innocent little sweet deer, right? I mean, that's a sense of compassion we have. We don't know those deer. They're not our friends. But we still kind of feel bad for them. God has that same compassion, although he knows us much more deeply. He is a God of compassion who hurts when he sees that type of brokenness being lived out. And that compassion we have, that's a reflection of who he is and our creation how he created us in his own image. He is a God of compassion. He is a God of relationship. He said, I'm going to make a promise to you to be your God and to care for you. And you guys need to be my people. And what did we do? Yes, that's a great God, except I think I'm just going to go over here and worship this other God for a while. And we turned our back on him time and time and time again. We do it then, we do it today. And what does God do? Does he slap us upside the head and kill us all? No, he keeps coming back to us. He keeps coming back to his people. Sometimes he does slap us up the head. He does make us pay a price for that. But he keeps coming back to his people because he wants relationship with us. Because he values us. He is a God who desires relationship with us. And lastly, we see him as a God who works through people to do his work. These judges were nothing exceptional. They were regular people. Othniel had nothing about him that distinguished him. Gideon, the one we heard about who broke the jars and took 30,000 men. God said, whittle it down to 300. Took 300 men and conquered thousands and thousands of their enemy. He was just from the small tribe. In fact, he was the one who just didn't really believe that he was being called to anything. And he said, I'm going to put out this fleece. Maybe you know this story. I'm going to put out this fleece, and if in the morning everything is wet and it's dry, I'll believe that you really are an angel telling me to go follow God. And in the morning, the fleece was dry and everything was wet. And Gideon said, I don't... Tell you what, I'm going to put out this fleece again, and if in the morning everything's dry and it's wet, then I'll believe you. And in the morning, everything was dry and it was wet. So he finally believed. So he wasn't a guy of great faith or power or influence. He was just a regular, doubting, knucklehead guy who God chose to do this remarkable thing. Deborah, she was a woman when women didn't do this type of thing. But she had been in the right place, in the right time, the right character to be a superhero. These people lived uninspiring, ordinary lives. And they woke up one morning and they realized that they had been thrust into a position of greatness and that God had work to do to save his people through them. And they had been being groomed and ready for that position their whole lives. And they didn't even recognize it. They were just average people. Because God works through people to do remarkable things. He works through average people to do highly unaverage things. But he also works through average people to do wonderful, remarkable things. One-on-one. Not every superhero saves the whole city from the villain. Superheroes save people one at a time, too. Tom was a depressed 16-year-old kid with a terrible family and terrible problems in school and no sense of hope. And one day he gave up. And he drove his old car to a bridge and parked next to the bridge and got out and began to walk to the middle of that bridge. Living nearby was a girl named Cindy who for some reason took note of him and decided to walk out and follow him. And as she got onto the bridge, she saw Tom stop in the middle and begin to prepare himself to leap over it. And she kept on walking, and she walked up to him in a soft voice and said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And Tom, taken aback, began a conversation with her. And in that conversation, Cindy revealed something she had not talked to really anybody about. She rolled up her sleeves and showed Tom scars where she too had been so depressed one day she decided to take her life, but she had failed. In the middle of that bridge, Tom changed his mind and walked off that bridge with Cindy. And they became friends for years after that. And decades after that, Pastor Tom looked back on that moment as the moment in his life when someone who had been prepared and at the right time and the right place with the right experiences had made all the difference in how he lived and he would live. Our Lord wants people to know him and wants people to know he cares about them. And he raises up all kinds of powerful people in our lives to do that oftentimes. And some have their names written in the history books. Some have their names written in the Bible. Some we hear about on the news for a day. And some, most, we never hear about. Because they were the right person in the right place, at the right time, with the right background to make a difference in the lives of one other person. The student who flunked the test and thought life was over, but now can look back and say to other students struggling, hey, you're going to be okay. The woman who has been lonely for years and now can talk to that new widow about what it means to get on with life differently. The guy who had a job and an identity, but then who lost that and thought his life was over, but now can share with others that there is hope without those things. We can thank God for the great heroes of the day that saved cities and millions. We can thank God for the small heroes of the day, the minor heroes that are far more common and make a difference in our lives. Perhaps you know one of those heroes. Perhaps tomorrow you will wake up and find yourself thrust into the middle of a conversation or a situation that saves millions or that saves one. Because that is how our God works. Through his people and with his people. That is how he brings us back to him. That is how he loves us. That is the God we have. In Jesus' name.